Ari Yablok, welcome to Shark Tank. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we're going to talk about your transition from being Rav Ari Yablok to Ari Yablok, and we'll talk about that practical transition and the identity shift that happened. So let's start with your early rabbinic aspirations, your early rabbinic career, and how that played out when you were coming out of yeshiva and starting your adult life.
Yeah, so I didn't necessarily have in mind to be a rabbi, let's say a pulpit or anything. I kind of had my eyes on, let's say, the Kiruv or informal, role. I certainly I was connected to people in, let's say, NCSY and in Aish and places like that. And when I got started in my career, I was kind of open to different kind of places. I don't think I was meant to kind of stay in a classroom. There were people way better than me at doing the formal education thing. And that happened to be that my first year that I was in Israel, I was in Greece Kollel. I had just gotten married in Yerushalayim, and I didn't get married in Yerushalayim. I got married and then moved to Yerushalayim in Greece. And that year, kind of revamping this one-year program at Bar Ilan University with a more Kiruv-centered focus. It had previously been around mostly as kind of an academic gap year, and someone from NCSY had taken over, and they were looking for someone to kind of help run campus programming and be part of the informal education staff, and that's how I got started. We made Aliyah formally, and we got started there, and that's kind of how I saw, I didn't really think long-term about where this was going to go. This was mostly like a great way to get started. I lived on the campus with students. I did programming at night, gave some shiurim, was getting my social work degree during the day, and moved on from there. A few years later, when we got more involved in the community in Givat Shmuel, which is where the community that we were living in or around, and involved with the Anglo students there, there was an opportunity to be more involved in campus life, not just the gap year program, but the students that were full-time students for the entire degree in the university. And I've been connected with the campus Rav Shlomo Shefer, and even talked to some of the heads of OU's JLIC who were exploring how to get involved there. And then I ended up moving into a kind of English-speaking campus rabbi role there, where I did more community, spiritual, religious programming, gave weekly shir, and had a lot of, programs in my house on Shabbatot, ran Shabbatonim, helped facilitate student-run programs. There's a very active organization or program called Here Next Year, which helps students or, people who are thinking of making Aliyah from seminary yeshiva world to kind of connect with other like-minded people and figure out the systems here. That was started by students in Bar Ilan that I was sitting in a room with them and they were actively figuring out how to get that started. So a lot of things like that, and that's kind of my early beginnings.
So correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like almost a dream come true. You come to Grus to get your feet wet in Israel. You get tapped for this job, which seems to really fit your skills and your passions for teaching Torah in an informal setting. So how long was that period end to end? And when did you start realizing that this wasn't going to be the career that you were in for your entire life?
Yeah, so like I said, I had every intention of staying in this field for my career. Again, I wasn't really career-minded. I was more Kiruv and kind of live the life minded. I was not this ambitious career-minded person. This was, I believe, 7 years. I think it was 2009 to 2016 that I was, again, first 3 years living on the campus with students, then living right across the street from campus or right around campus for another 4. And it was around that, it was last year and even the year before where I was not sure what was going to happen once I was inside the university. And in that role, I was doing a bunch of different things in the university. I was doing recruitment and marketing for their international schools or for English speakers. I was doing the rabbinic side. I was also teaching a bit, and the school itself, the university itself, was kind of deciding what they wanted to do with their English speaking students, if they wanted to build it into something more significant, if they wanted to put funds, here or there. Universities in Israel, without going into it too much, tend to be very bureaucratic. And a lot of people with power and with access to funds making decisions based on, competing interests. And it basically became clear to me that even if I secure the next year of my role the way I want it, there's very little stability. I'm very much not in control of my destiny because one person could show up and decide they want to make a drastic change, and that's it. And I didn't like that feeling. I had already 4 children by then, and I think a fifth was about to show up. I was in a state where I needed to, where stability, financial stability, and long term, thinking career wise became a big focus. I couldn't just play around with my dreams anymore. So that's where I had to make a really important judgment call. And I was essentially given like, I wasn't given. I thought of my future in 3 different paths. I could go after another similar role, and there were a couple of them being offered to me, similar in the sense that I could go to a largely Anglo yeshiva or seminary or Kiruv institution, perhaps, string a few of them together, as is commonly done. When I thought of that, I said to myself, it's possible that I'm in the very same situation in 3 years from now, where I didn't necessarily elevate my career in the sense that I put myself in a stronger earning position. And that institution in 3 years could also find itself making big changes that I have no control over. And that didn't settle well with me. Another option was I was already on the side doing clinical therapy as a trained social worker. I had a big student and young professional and couples community right around me that, as anyone knows, there's no shortage of people in need of that kind of help. And I thought to myself, maybe I should do that full time. And the other option was that I was always kind of enthralled. And as a hobby, I always loved the world of tech. From a little child, I was always interested in kind of the new gadgets that were coming out. I could tell you all the specs of the latest laptops, even though those weren't even cool. They were just new, right? And especially, mobile technology and all that. Never trained in anything, never thought about it as something professional, but I did, understand that there's a huge world of startup happening right down the block in Tel Aviv. And that does represent a more stable income, short term and long term. Stable in the sense that these are real, businesses. They don't come and go necessarily. You have to pick the right one, but it represented a whole different path with maybe a lot more upside.
So you're standing there with these 3 doors in front of you, so to speak. Just practically, what were you doing to think through these issues? Did you have friends, mentors, or bayim? I hope you were, in contact and in communication with your wife at this point. So what are some of the practical things that you were doing, clarify and crystallize what you wanted in that next step, and then how did it ended up turning out?
Good point. I was definitely, obviously this was something I was talking about with my wife a lot, although there wasn't any clear yes or no answer. There was no, this is the right path, that is the wrong path. It all felt like a gamble, all of it. We even had an opportunity to move to Tel Aviv to become like a community rabbinic couple, rabbinic family living in the heart of Tel Aviv. We spent a Shabbos there. There was an organization that wanted to basically sponsor us, moving there, and that even felt like an option for reasons, regarding moving our family to the middle of Tel Aviv. We didn't do it. So like there were all of these gambles. I spoke to Rabbeim. There wasn't anyone telling me I had a clear answer. Then there was some sort of free business consulting service for Olim. That it might have even been just a random email. And again, because I was just searching, I was listening to a lot of podcasts on how to rebuild your career. I was reading up on, how to enter the world of tech and marketing. These were all things that anyone could find and not necessarily kind of opening a door for you. But then I decided to take up a free business consulting session with someone. And he gave me a very nice guy. I only met him once. He gave me a very interesting insight. He said, well, it looks like you have the world of therapy or psychology on one end and the world of tech in the other. And he said, psychologists or therapists, the older you are, the more respected or the more desirable you are. And in the world of tech, it's the opposite. The younger you are, fresher you are, so to speak, the more desirable you are in the market. So he said, why don't you try tech now and try therapy later? And it kind of made sense to me in terms of de-risking my decision. Kind of, if I'm looking for stability, find the thing that seems the most, that has the most opportunity now, and I still have more opportunity later if I feel I need to pivot. And that's what I did. And what I mean by did is I sent resumes all over the place to random companies. I had done a great deal of writing and marketing inside Bar Ilan to create open houses and run recruitment programs and rebuild their website. Nothing on the level of tech, but I knew my way around how to write in an interesting, meaningful way. No one was interested, and I could only attribute it to hashgacha. There was one opportunity that came up, but it was very entry level, and it was a small, literally one room office that didn't feel like it was going to go anywhere special, although it was an offer, so it was way better than all the other non-offers. And then there was this other company, more of a classic Israeli startup, that was looking to open a new position that they hadn't hired for yet in product content, where this person would work with a product team who's building a digital product in their startup, and this writer would kind of understand how the product works and what it does and help create the content around it, guides, tutorials, even the writing within the app itself that they were building so that it would help users on board. And it happened to be, it was a company that was helping users of mobile technologies get to know how to use their technology better. So it required someone who knew a lot about gadgets. And they're like, how much do you know? And I happen to know a whole lot for fun. And they were actually even surprised by how much I knew intimately about these things. And it was at that moment where I was like, oh my gosh, there's some sort of hashgacha happening here where they needed a new position, so they were ready to take a gamble on someone because it was brand new. They needed someone who knew mobile technology that I happened to know because as a hobby, and it was a right place, right time thing, and that's how I got my.
Well, before we dive a little deeper into your tech career, it's interesting how you're making this big pivot. You're already, a couple years into your adult life, your family, your marriage, and you're making pivot number one. And the advice you got is to already plan, pivot number two. So you're going from chapter one to chapter two, planning chapter three. And I'm wondering, do you think that people are a little bit too close-minded as far as how many chapters they could have and really fulfill different itches of theirs and skills of theirs by thinking of their career as a one long track that's going to go from 25 till 65?
Yeah, I mean, if you look around in the world of business, that trend is very apparent. The whole idea of a linear career where you start as an entry level in one industry and you move up to, manager and then senior manager and then director and then department head and vahule, that is dead. There's even a culture of if you are staying in the same company, let alone the same role, but if you're in the same company for more than 4 or 5 years, it's viewed as you're static. You've gotten stale. You've only been exposed to one thing, and it's because the nature of our world is moving at so much of a faster pace that you almost have to keep pivoting in order to remain kind of sharp in the market. And I do think it might have to do with the previous generation, where the longer you could stay in a role, I could hear my parents and certainly my grandparents saying to me, the longer you stay in a role, or just keep your job, right? And there was kind of a feeling of you don't want to be moving around. That is a sign of instability. That's a sign of you're not reliable. You need to keep advancing, and it's completely flipped. And for people to think not only you know, can I make a change? It's not even that anymore. And I want this to be clear. It's not, is it possible? It's actually, I need to be making changes. I need to constantly be expanding what I am capable of doing on a professional level, even if I am really good at one thing, because it just allows me to have more opportunities when I need them. And just because the world is not the same world it is even a few years ago, I need to be able to maximize those opportunities.
That was very cool. When we spoke before, you mentioned to me how you had this sort of three-staged approach to building your tech and marketing career, which included something very interesting, which is this concept which we find in the Torah of Yerida L'Tzarech Aliyah, that not always are you going up in status, not always you're going up in salary. Sometimes you need to take other considerations into account. So maybe tell us about that approach and how you developed it and how you implemented it.
Yeah, so again, this might have been as a result of just binging on a lot of different podcasts, career building advice that I was grabbing from everywhere. Somehow, I don't even remember exactly how I kind of came to the conclusion. I somehow realized I needed to build this thing. This wasn't get a job. Getting a job is something that I could have already done in my own, tchum, in my own industry as an informal teacher. That's not why I made this very drastic change in my life. What I needed to do was achieve stability, achieve an outlook that expands farther than a couple of years, right? And that to me represented three different stages. And this is something that honestly is very repeatable and very usable for someone looking to pivot to a new career, which is get get the job. And the goal of that first job in the industry, in this new industry, in this new area of work, is not to make as much money as you can. It's not even to get the right role, but the one that speaks to you the most. Those are not the goals. The goals are to learn the most. There's a phrase in the career building world is your first job is for learning, not earning. And the point is there's a whole culture, there's a vocabulary, there's a dynamic that you need to get acquainted with in order to even have a chance of getting to that status you're looking for of I am a master of what I'm doing. I'm being given responsibilities. I'm now an owner of a part of this organization. So that was what I did at first. Stage two was find what it is that you are exceptionally good at and passionate about. And it's that thing that you can make your mark in this industry on. And once you find what that is, find the role that will help you maximize that, whether that's in the same company or it's in the same industry but in a different company. And when you find that role, dedicate yourself to just that. And that's important because if you stay kind of a generalist, it's really hard to get to that next level towards achieving financial stability of ownership, of responsibility, of even leadership. Again, not everyone's meant to be a leader, but the more responsibility you're given, the more financial opportunity you'll have, right? And then that third role is when you're the master at it, get to get that senior next step. And that could be by promotion, and that could be by becoming so desirable for what you're really good at that you are actually being coveted. You are being poached, so to speak, to do exactly what you're really good at in that next role. And for me, I started as a product content writer, like I mentioned. It was great because I knew how to do it. I knew how to write and I knew about tech. It was as much of an entry level as possible. Like you hinted to before, I had taken a pay cut from what I was doing in the world of informal education and nonprofit. I went to making less money, and that was very hard. That was a very month to month situation where help was needed, and putting together different things was the only way for me to get through. I was actually, arranged my schedule so I could continue teaching in the university and getting a salary there. So I was really still putting things together. But I knew that if I went for the best paying job, but the worst learning job, this would not work. This would not last. And in that company, in that 2 years that I was there, I found this world of branding. I was put on a project kind of a year and a half into my job to create this new brand for a new type of service that they were doing, working with pretty senior professionals in the organization on what we were going to call it, how were we going to design the website of it, the type of messages we were going to say. I was having regular meetings, and as this was happening, I was like, whoa, this is me. This is what I can do on a very, on a high level. I feel like I know this world, even though I've never worked in it. And it was right then that I said, okay, stage two unlocked. Let's go find that job. And I actually had been vying for a promotion within the company, and Baruch Hashem received it, which included a pay raise, a very significant one, which took me out of that entry level world. And then right at that same time, a position in a branding agency for a head of messaging role to own the idea of storytelling and building brands within an agency that works for all kinds of startups opened up, and I applied, and it was kind of a great fit both ends. And even though I had just been given a promotion literally a month earlier, I walked into my, supervisor and said, I'm leaving. And guess what? I took a pay cut to leave a second time. And that was because I knew this was the path. I needed to follow the process to get to where I wanted to go.
Let's just summarize that. You started with a learning job. Then the second phase of the process is to discover something you're really good at and passionate about. And then the third is to really be able to take ownership and to dive deep and apply that full time or focused almost primarily on that. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes. And then use that expertise that you've built in stage two to get a senior level job, one where you are given maximum responsibility and financial opportunity because you are wanted for your expertise.
So one thing about that I wanted to ask you is it's interesting because we talk about finding your passion, something you're really good at. So if you take someone, in yeshiva or in college and you tell them to find their passion, so it'll probably be, a Tosfos. Or if you take a high school in America, it might be baseball. And those things are all wonderful, but not necessarily a way to feed a family. But by putting it in that second stage, after you're in a sustainable, normal business industry, and then within that framework, finding something that you can be good at, passionate out, not just like a blank slate, the world is your oyster and you could do, be the batting stance guy and make up runs off of that. Like that's not sustainable, but you're putting it within a context of a more classic business model. And then you find your passion. That is a lot, it's a very different view and a lot more practical way of finding your passion versus the other way around.
Yeah, this is such an important point that I'm glad you're bringing up. Your passion, I'll put it this way. I grew up in a family of mechamchim. My father was a principal of a yeshiva day school in Manhattan. My mother was the head of the preschool of that same school. My world was a world of chinuch and rabbanos, not pulpit, but that was the world I lived in. I couldn't imagine how people could separate their life into two worlds of going to work in a foreign environment that isn't intimately connected with the other half of their world of spirituality, of tachlis, if you want to call it. It didn't make sense to me, even though I've seen many people do it, and I have siblings and family members that do that. To me, it didn't speak to me, and I couldn't relate to it. And once I was forced to have to relate to it, because I realized this is how I'm going to be able to survive, literally, I had to kind of reorient my mind around what does it mean to do something you're passionate about that isn't directly the things that matter most to you in the world. And here's an interesting unlock that happened in my brain. What did I love most about informal education, about Kiruv, and I imagine anyone who has even seen it in general has similar feelings? It was inspiring people. I had an obsession with that. I dreamed about it. I loved the idea of saying something, creating an experience, being a person in someone else's life that inspired them. And, I'm musical. I had spent some time in YU and otherwise playing music in a band. That also was fueled by I wanted to make music that inspired people, that meant something to people. Inspiration was kind of the basis of that. And of course, inspiration geared towards getting closer to Hashem was what Kiruv really is. And when I arrived at branding, I don't think I did this in real time, but I think I did it lemafreya. Like retroactively, I realized what is branding and what is marketing really? Marketing is how do I inspire someone who is completely uninformed and on the outside to find something meaningful and important to them enough so that they would want to invest money in it and buy it and own it. That's what that was. And I started to make this connection that, every time I made a title for my weekly shear and I was thinking of a clever, interesting way to phrase that title, I was thinking, how is this one phrase, this one sentence going to get someone to get off their couch and want to come listen to a shear on a Monday night, right? And when I write an email to kind of get people excited about a Shabbaton, all I'm doing is writing a marketing email. I'm just doing it in the context of Kiruv and context of community. And I realized that everything I was doing was really some form of branding and marketing, even though it wasn't my profession. It's not what I was being paid to do. And when I kind of came around to I realized that actually I had been preparing for this. I had been training informally for this kind of role. And I think this is not, an isolated case. I think anyone who has a passion for something, there are different elements there that if they deconstruct and they say, what do I like about this thing? What do I like about being in a classroom? What do I like about standing in front of a kihila and talking to them? What do I like about, organizing big events or getting masses of people to move forward in some way? You could take elements from there and apply it to the world of business where they need you badly, where you are actually uniquely positioned to slip right in and be very effective. And there was a large group of couples from Grus my year that stayed in Israel. We actually get together every year in Yom Ha'atzmaut. Beautiful, because it started with couples and one or two kids, and now it's like a whole tribe of everyone that's there, Bli Ayin Hara. And many of those people, friends of mine, have since left the world of Chinuch Rabbanis, and one of them is a software developer for Mobileye, one of the biggest tech companies in Israel. Another one is for an investment firm. And these are people that got in and immediately became extremely valuable. And to me, it was not surprising that within a couple of years, they were now senior, they were now managing teams, because we're actually uniquely positioned to provide a lot of value in these places, even though we feel like foreigners and outsiders, but it's because what we know how to do really well.
Started out by mentioning this was like a process realization that you came to and you unlocked. And you also mentioned that it's not a unique case. It could be applicable to any other person. And I think those two things are both very, very true, that these things oftentimes need a transition period, and it's not always, can't always plan ahead of time to pick apart what I like about the chinuch world and then automatically apply it in a very smooth transition. I think that is a process that many people have to go to. And I'm wondering for you about that transition. Can you tell us a little bit about how that felt for you, going from, as we mentioned before, being Rav Ari and this person who held a very formal and important rabbinic role to within a few years having a career which is almost completely focused on business? Was that something difficult and challenging for you?
It was very difficult. I want to be very open and clear about that. I was still, a day earlier, I was the rabbi for many of the English speaking individuals in my community. And a day later, I was not. And in their minds, my position or my identity, I should say, didn't change. So I was still getting calls or seeing people in the supermarket or even still giving shiurim, like just without the title as Ravari. And, I wasn't correcting people per se and saying I'm not Ravari anymore, but I was kind of grappling with the fact that I didn't mean I wasn't the same person to them. I didn't have that same place in their life that I used to. And I very much identified with that person. It was who I was. I was the person that you came to or that had a positive religious experience as, the result of being in my home or attending a shiur or a program that I had organized. And I had to somewhat let that go. And I remember speaking to someone, Mo Mernick, good friend of mine who I knew because his wife actually was at Bar Ilan, and I had been responsible for hiring her and bringing them to Israel for this job at Bar Ilan. He already early on had in mind to be career-minded in the business world, but he gave a Daf Yomi shiur, and he came from a world of Kiruv. His family had Kiruv in it and was very active in that way, and he just kept reminding me, even if it's not your parnasa, it's still your profession, so to speak. This is still a part of you. It just has to be defined differently. It's not where your salary is coming from, but it is something that you take seriously the same way you would take your profession seriously. And that was important because, like I mentioned, I was still teaching. I was still looking for ways to contribute to the community. I still am. But I had to transition from this is kol kuli, this is like my life, my identity, to this is my priority, even if it's not my profession. And it took a while for me to get used to that. And I think that's normal. That's natural to kind of struggle with that because you are kind of going from being one person to being a couple different people who mean something to someone and something else to a whole bunch of other people.
You had a great line when we spoke last time, like be sitting on the bus thinking like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, there were definitely times. I mean, I was going from working right down the block inside of a religious institution with religious Jews for the most part all around me, to going into an environment where I was one of maybe two religious people and taking buses, noisy buses into the heart of Tel Aviv and back. And there were plenty of nights where I'm just sitting on the bus in a hot, non-air conditioned bus surrounded by, a chulent of humanity, just thinking like, where am I? Like, Ayeka, like, where are you? Right? And what happened here? And it's easy to think like I failed, like this didn't work out in a sense. If things were going the right way, I wouldn't be forced, so to speak, to have to move into this new chapter where I was quite literally letting go of a piece of me and replacing it with something much less meaningful for the sake of gashmias. This is a perspective that you could easily fall into. Like I was replacing the minutes of my day that were fully consumed with meaningful work with writing articles or coming up with cool names for technologies that don't really matter if you take, two steps back, and spending crazy hours doing that. I was also working much longer hours. The startup world is, you start at 9, you could end at 9, and ending before 7 is not typical. So it was a lot of time, and I had to adjust as a human being and find meaning in what I'm doing. And there were some things that I grabbed onto. I certainly had to make a transition from I am prioritizing my family living in Israel. That was a very important message to me. When you're doing Kiruv, a lot of times you're thinking of the people around you and not instead of the people inside your own home, but kind of alongside it. It's kind of one big thing. Make it all work. That's kind of, the mentality. And I think another big shift in mentality is I need to make sure this family living in Israel thing that works, and this is how it's going to work. And we many of us are familiar with the Gemara. It's better to sweep the streets of Yerushalayim than to give shir in Chutz La'aretz. And I was grabbing onto those things. Those were important messages for me to remember as I made this transition to know this is a path. This is not a failure. This is me reprioritizing to ensure the success of something that didn't have a path to success. And that was quality life in Eretz HaKodesh.
Okay. Practically speaking, were there any things that you were able to develop for yourselves as far as your learning, your teaching? Obviously, it's never an easy transition, but any of the practical advice that you could give from those early years about having that Torah part of your life despite being so busy with a career?
There's no easy answer to that besides if it matters to you, then it needs to be treated like not an optional part of your week, but something I can't compromise on. So again, if it's not something that you're still making money, like I mentioned, my first few years in tech, I was still teaching for a small salary, but that was an obligation of mine. And since then it has dropped off. But what I've done is pretty much every single time I've gotten a call to say, can you give a shir, or we're looking for someone to contribute in this way or that, I kind of made a decision that the answer is yes, unless I'm putting my marriage in jeopardy or my health. So I just take up those opportunities. So, Hoshana Rabbah, Hanukkah, even Tisha B'Av, I did a bunch of keynotes, explanations, not as Rav Ari, but as Ari, the tech guy, right? And I do think there is such thing as saying, okay, Monday nights, I'm either going to the shir or I'm giving the shir, or things like that, where you just say, it's not my salary, but it is my profession.
I want to transition to the last part of our conversation and talk a little bit about branding. I've always been a little bit bothered by the idea of having a personal brand. I feel like, I don't know, like I'm a person. Why do I need a brand? So what's your thoughts about that?
A brand, it's interesting. I mean, personal branding just as a discipline is essentially saying I am creating a clear identity that people can remember me by, that people can kind of recognize me, and I'm promoting it. I think that's the part maybe that's less comfortable to people. You don't have a brand unless it's being promoted out there. So everyone has an identity. Everyone is a person. It's actually a very Jewish thing, right? You have a name. Hashem made you in a certain way that is unlike any other person. And if you think about just what branding is, and again, I've obviously been living this for many years, the idea of a brand is to try and apply the very unique aspects of what it means to be an individual to an entity. that is not an individual, to a company, to a product. It's taking the elements of what makes someone unique, their look, their voice, their traits, their interests, all of those things, and the more accurate and authentic it could be, the better, and applying that to something that doesn't already have those things. And the reason why it's so effective is because what makes us connected to other people is their uniqueness. I like things because of, and whatever the end of that sentence is their unique qualities of an individual thing. And that applies everywhere. So that is why more and more businesses, just zooming out before zooming back in, that is why more and more businesses are saying, wait, we need to, as opposed to just building a product and selling it, we need to actually become an entity that people want to associate themselves with, and not just a product they want to buy and then forget, but we want them to want us, to want to be around us, to want to associate themselves with us the same way, famously now for pretty much everyone on earth, people don't just buy Apple products because they work well. They buy Apple products because they want to be associated with Apple, with someone who buys Apple products. And that is an identity thing. You're not even buying the product anymore. You're buying the association. And when it comes to personal branding, all we're really saying is, I want to highlight and promote the qualities or the things that I do that are unique to me, that you will find uniquely attractive and cool. And the more clearly defined they are, the more memorable I become, because I am me and not anyone else. The more valuable I am, because I am the only place you could come to get whatever it is you like about me, even if it's just my voice or my opinions or my humor, right? Any of those things. And by definition, I boosts my ability, or it opens up opportunities for me to do more.
That makes sense, and I definitely agree that you put your finger on a good point, which is I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of self-promotion, which is certainly a part of the branding. A follow-up question to that would be, as a consumer yourself and a Bentora, the idea of buying the Apple experience seems a little bit counter to what I was brought up on, from my Rebbeim, and you buy what you need, and you need something you need earphones, so get earphones, find something which is a good quality and a good price and fits what you need. But the idea, I don't know, some of the the lofty branding that some of these big companies, as you mentioned, Apple and Nike and others do, I don't know, I've been a little bit, I'm debating what to think about that as a Bentora and a consumer. So how do you approach that?
I was describing the power that branding has inside of it to shift your mind from a utility driven transaction where I lack a certain resource and I just need to buy that resource, to I want to connect with something on a deeper level and really connect with a part of me on a deeper level. And that's why I'm buying you, so to speak. You're not buying the phone, you're buying Apple. I think that idea as kind of a mushel is very powerful. The reason, maybe what you're pointing out is the reason not to go with brand name products is because their brand is so powerful that they could charge sometimes double for the same product, because they understand that you're not just buying the product, you're buying the product and the brand. And if you want to just buy the product, buy the knockoff that's half price. You might sacrifice on quality and other things like that, but you'll more or less get the same thing, right? And, there are different people that have different philosophies about that. I actually like the reliability of good brands. Understand that they need to be reliable, because then their brand reputation is, they're fancy, but they're not actually trustworthy. I can't trust them. That's a problem. So I actually, products like Apple and Nike, for that part of it, I know what I'm getting, and I know they stand by their products. I do think there's something very interesting about brand, though, if I could just segue. I see brand as the neshama of something. If you think about that, I use the word identity, and I have a hard time saying the word soul in the world of tech, where people aren't necessarily having that kind of conversation. But there are some people where I've mentioned this point, and they're like, exactly, because many people struggle with the idea that brand isn't necessarily one thing. It's not my logo. It's not the colors that I chose. It's not this particular tagline, because that could change. It's not any one particular thing. There's actually the introduction to Aryeh Kaplan's Atzal's book, I think Encounters. I think it's that one, where he talks about if you were to have a full body transplant, but your brain would stay the same, are you still you? What if you would then have a brain transplant? So now you're not your body and not your brain. Are you still you? And the whole exercise was like, what is you? Because there are technological breakthroughs that allow you to replace certain things of you with someone else's. What if all your internal organs have been transplanted, right? And his point is, your soul is not any of this. And I even think he said, like point at you, and most people point at like their chest, but you can replace your chest in 2024, right? And you are your soul. And I think what that means is this unique blend of the traits and the dreams and the values that you are that can't be associated with anyone else but you. And that's really what a brand is. And so I honestly think about my job a lot as, how do I give this company a soul? Something that is that has meaning, that has something real to them. And I've even brought in, just to finish this thought, brought in a lot of ideas from the world of Torah to when I teach about brands and when I try and sell ideas about brands. There was a virtual conference I was asked to speak at earlier this year, where the question was, how do you convince your leadership or your company about why brand is so important? And I talked about how founders of companies are actually building two things. They're building a product and they're building a company. And one of them you're building with bricks, right? A product, you need certain features and certain services and certain physical or software related things to be built, yesh me'ayin, in order for it to exist. And there are other things that you're planting, meaning to say, you're not actually seeing the outcome of your work now. You're planting seeds in people's minds that later will become this amazing, big, important thing that you couldn't actually get to unless you started planting now. And that's really what brand is, where you're planting ideas in people's minds of, this is important, this is what we stand for. And it won't really get, the full picture won't really be formulated until later on, when people say, ooh, I got to get what they're selling. They're awesome. And that is a straight up idea from Rav Shlomo Volbe in a book that he wrote, Zriya Ubinyan B'Chinuch, where he talks about chinuch being two disciplines, one where you're actively building now in the short term, and one where you're planting ideas and values that will only manifest in the long term. And I actually even talked about it on LinkedIn, and someone commented from my world who's like, Revolvi? Question mark. And I'm like, oh, there you go. Revolvi's on LinkedIn.
Right.
So there's so much crossover, and this is maybe specifically for brand why I find it so meaningful, because I do see it very deeply rooted in Avodas Hashem, in a way of like, we're finding ourselves, we're uncovering ourselves, we're building ourselves, and I'm just applying those same ideas to the world of work.
Okay. It's a fascinating conversation, and those insights are all very cool. I think for me as a consumer and looking at the consumer landscape, I think the point that resonated most is the difference between buying a utility and buying something which is more than a utility. So what you said was you want a utility, and the brand ensures reliability for the utility, which makes a lot of sense. But when you start talking about buying something that represents my neshama, that reflects back on who I like, I don't know, like, are the shirts that I buy supposed to be a reflection of my neshama, or are they just supposed to be shirts?
I think that's subjective, meaning to say, not everyone that buys a shirt that has, Ralph Lauren on it is buying it because it's some mini form of avodah zarah where they're worshiping Ralph Lauren, or they're trying to associate themselves with something meaningless. I'm not necessarily ready to get behind the kavanas of why people are buying. Like I said, the reason to buy a brand could also be functional. Like, I'm buying it because I like how I look at it. I look mechubad. I look very sharp, and that's important. I'm wearing a shirt right now, J. Crew Factory Outlet, right? .com, whatever. There's no logo on it, but I bought it because I know that brand is reliable, even the factory version, and I'm gonna look presentable, and I think that's fine. I think if someone chooses to define themselves by the brands they wear or by the brands they buy, or that somehow they, as an individual, are lacking if they don't have those things that they associate with, that's a different thing. And that is, maybe something that is a deficiency in terms of understanding their worth. Maybe it's more psychological than spiritual, right? where I'm not good enough. And it's something that many people younger, in their younger years, very much in tune to brands. Teenagers are obsessed with brands, and it makes a lot of sense psychologically if you think about it, because teenagers are in the prime of who am I, right? They have no idea what they are and they're trying to discover it. And a lot of times associating with brands actually is a shortcut. Ooh, I'm this kind of person. I have this kind of social status. I have, right? And, I wouldn't say let's ban brands from teenagers because it leads them down the wrong path. But I do think it's a good observation of why that's so popular among that age and what we could be doing, around that to say, here are ways that you can, the right ways to look towards to form your identity or to define yourselves.
Do you ever have a conversation with
Let's
your
go.
kids about they want a certain brand? It's expensive. You don't necessarily want to shell out the money, but it's a brand and the kid is a teenager or a preteen and wants it. And how do you navigate those conversations as a father, an educator, and a brand expert?
I've definitely had a lot of those conversations. I do think even if it's with the wrong, mitok shalolashma, there is a certain worth for a kid feeling good about themselves. There's a certain social currency with being able to go to school. And I don't mean luxury. That's a different conversation. I just mean mechubad, right? That I feel good about the way I look or the things that I have. I think that is an important thing for them to be able to feel good about themselves. And at the same time, I do run into situations where it's an exaggeration, where it goes too far, where it's either I want this even though I have two of them already. I just want a third one because, oh my God, I love it. And then I see that as you have to understand when something, it becomes an obsession or becomes unhealthy to have this on your mind all the time. And there are plenty of times where I know just as a consumer that the knockoff version is actually the same exact thing. And there's no reason to spend more money just to be able to tell my friends because they wouldn't even notice otherwise, right? And then there's no even feeling good or bad about it. It's just to be able to, a guide thing. So yeah, those are interesting conversations to navigate. But I don't think we should strip kids away from things that make them feel confident about themselves or give them some social currency. I think they need those, even if it's short term.
Last question for today. You mentioned before you sort of tied together your music career, the idea of inspiring people, and the world of brand. And my question about that entire bundle is there is an approach in the business world which says that everything needs to be measurable. Our actions, our results, our business, we need to be able to divide everything into these measurable outcomes, measurable processes. And correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me that this world of inspiration, brand, music is probably a lot harder to measure. So what's your take on that world? Opinion?
Interesting question. I do think we're in the olam hamaaseh. Something I struggle with actually very personally is I have a lot of things I want to do. Baruch Hashem, there are people whose nisayon is they don't know what they should be doing, or they don't have opportunities, or they don't have clear directions. I think I suffer from having too many and having a lot of things that I wish I would have done by this point in my life, or that I could still be involved in, and just don't have the time and the ability to do it all. And I do think it would be a shame if I go to my grave, Acher Me'ah Esrim, and there are songs that were never written or never published or never shared or never played. And there are books that stay in my head and now will never leave. Or there, things that I wanted to do with my children, right? So I do think, maybe instead of just in a dry way copying and pasting, everything needs to be measured. I do think a mistake would say nothing needs to be measured, or I don't need to have concrete goals if it's not my career, if it's not it's not my, davar kavua already, right? Like it needs to, what I want to do more of is say by Rosh Hashanah next year, I will have 1, 2, 3, 4, written the first chapter of this sefer that I wanted to write, finished these 2 songs, taken my kids on this experience, those types of things, and treat it very seriously. I do think one of the very big gifts that I feel blessed to have been given by making this pivot to this world of business or the world of tech is how amazingly skilled the people I am surrounded by every day are at setting goals, at working incredibly hard and efficiently and accomplishing them at taking their craft very seriously, and amazed and think to myself, like, if only, right? If only we could take everything we do that is important to us, obviously the important things, right? That seriously and that take it professionally. I think there is a certain degree, and maybe if I could go a little bit, get a little bit spicy here, right? For the people that worked in the world of nonprofit organizations or the world of chinuch or the world of organizations like that here, and have also experienced the world of business or the world of tech or the world of, there's a very big difference. I shouldn't say very. There's definable, a clear, recognizable difference in the way things are taken very seriously and the way things are done very professionally and organized in one of those worlds, and very often seen how things are less organized or things are not done professionally in the other world. And I don't mean there's malpractice or that there's ill will or that there's someone doing something criminal or wrong. I don't mean that. I mean level of professionalism of I'm going to take the little things and take them very seriously and do them well and apply that to everything that I do as a person. I'm going to take everything I do seriously. I think that's something we could learn and apply to every part of our life, and something that I did not witness until I started immersing myself in this world where things are systemized, where processes happen, where people are given ownership and said, you take care of this. I'm not going to even ask you until it's done. It's on you. And these are all things we could learn from a great deal in our personal lives, in the nonprofit world, in the world of chinuch, in avodas Hashem, all of that.
Beautiful. Ravari, thank you so much for taking so much time. You're involved in so many different things, and we appreciate you coming on today and sharing your journey with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Really loved sharing this story. So listening enjoyed as well.